your advice to the government right now in terms of where do they start to cushion the people, and how do they ensure that this rent fiasco doesn't spiral out of control?
Well, this is where government should come in strongly. You see, the issue is that we have a pandemic that we could not control, but the measures have been enforced and imposed by government, and rightly so, to make sure that the spread doesn't go wild. Right. So, but because the government has made these impositions, they should also come to the rescue of Kenyans who are now vulnerable or even more vulnerable because of these positions. So if the government says that people are not supposed to be, people are supposed to be social distancing, that there are curfew measures that really reduce the opportunity for people, especially in most vulnerable areas, low income areas, from working to pay rent and the like, and to buy basic goods and services, then they should come in a strong way to protect these people, to make sure that they are able to continue to have a roof above their head. Now, to some extent, there has been some action by the central bank to provide liquidity to the banks through the reduction of the cash reserve ratio and the reduction of the CBR to allow liquidity into the banks, and so that the banks can then follow on with that kind of financing to vulnerable businesses, such as people who are in the rental business, right? So the banks, it is on the banks now to be able to provide this liquidity down to these businesses. But then again, the banks are also in business, right? So they have to make a decision on who to lend to. And I think that's where the problem comes in. And in economics, it's called quantitative easing. The challenge is, yes, you provide liquidity, the government is providing liquidity, but are the banks then following on to pass that liquidity down to the people who need it most? So I think those discussions and arrangements between the central bank, the banks, and businesses needs to be had to make the flow of resources in terms of loans and guarantees for these businesses to happen, and so that you don't leave women, vulnerable, families vulnerable, with landlords taking roofs out of the heads of their houses, right?
Yeah.
And I think one more thing, Trevor, during this pandemic, we need to make sure that I think people are starting to become more self-centered and more insular. But in a time like this, people need to be a lot more community-minded. We need to resolve the issues that are happening in our community. So I think it's also on us, not just government, to make sure that we are taking care of our brothers and sisters, especially those in the most vulnerable areas.
All right. So from an economist perspective, at this particular point, what should Kenyans be thinking of? Should they be saving? Should they be buying? Because we also know that the currencies are dwindling left, right, and center. And now there's a stronger dollar now as you speak. And of course, there are those who are thinking, is this the time? Is it a buyer's market yet? Or should you just hold on to your money and not invest in anything as we speak?
I think that question depends on your position. If you have a lot of extra income, then it definitely is a buyer's market. I've talked to a lot of people in real estate. They're saying the market is starting to pick. People are trying to dispense of, for example, properties that they've had for a long time. Especially if they're cash strapped, they will take lower prices. But if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of disposable income, then this is the time to save. And I think this is a natural propensity. People will tend to spend less and save more. But if you have a lot more disposable income, then people are starting to invest in the market, in property, to be able to scoop up some of the more affordable opportunities that are offering themselves up now.
So, and from the research you've done based on the 47 counties that we're looking at, is devolution really helping us economically, or have we squandered the opportunity by looting the counties dry?
That is a strong position to take, Trevor. I think we are still in the early stages of devolution. I think we cannot judge right now whether devolution is dead in the water or whether it's a huge success. Definitely, the pandemic has caused additional strain to the counties because, as you know, things such as health are devolved. Functions such as agriculture also devolved, and these are the ones that are the hardest hit right now. So how we handle it has to be coordinated between the national and the county governments to make sure that the citizens are able to receive the services that they need and that they receive the protections that they need. And I think it's going to be a concerted effort. The advantage of having counties that they are more responsive to the citizens on the ground than having the way it was before. If you're in Turkana or if you're in Garissa, trying to reach the people in Nairobi can take a lot more time then trying to now you're only a step away from the governor's office and his administration to be able to address the issues on the ground.
Yeah, and the other thing, most of the concern that we get is mostly when petroleum products, when the crude oil prices go down, food products and everything else tends to come down with them. This is not the situation we are seeing now. Why is this so different?
I think because of the positions that we've taken, it's going to take a long time before the oil price drops actually affect our industry. We've already seen some price drops, but the situation where we see oil had dropped down to almost negative zero, under $0, and in fact, it's countries are now even paying other countries to take the oil. It becomes an interesting issue for us of whether we are able to import oil now at the low prices so that we can take advantage of those savings going forward. But then that depends on how much extra income we have and even storage. Do we have enough storage to bring in a lot of oil to shore up the economy?
All right. And as we come to an end, Mukia, I'll be speaking to the PS for Treasury in just a bit. From an economist perspective, what is the most pressing concern that you'd want him to address?
I think the most pressing concern is the issue of the most vulnerable in the society. While we are talking about providing the vulnerable in the society cash transfers, we all know that cash transfers cannot provide for a whole basket of goods for a household, especially in the vulnerable areas. So we need to also ask ourselves, are we also coordinating with other sectors to provide for in-kind reliefs, such as free electricity, free water, maybe even free Wi-Fi, so that people can be able to survive. Providing the reliefs in terms of VAT may not have a strong trickle-down effect, but it may have an effect for the middle and higher income households, but not for the most vulnerable. So how are we providing for in-kind reliefs for some of the more vulnerable households?
All right. And finally, I know as an economist, you're looking at how to come out of this COVID-19. How does a post-COVID-19 sort of look like? I don't want to say after COVID-19 because it's a disease. I don't think it's going to go away completely. We just have to learn how to live with it. How does post-COVID-19 recovery strategy look like? We know some airlines are now thinking of either leaving the middle seat empty. Should we then just restructure the entire interior? How does that look like?
I think there are going to be definite changes. Some changes for the better for the economy, but to the detriment of some major sectors of the economy, like you talked about airlines. Now people have largely moved to virtual meetings and virtual conferences, and this might be the norm. So the kind of commercial trade that is associated with the large conferences is going to be affected going forward, and I think that is going to affect some of the bigger airlines, some of the big, the Emirates or the Kenya Airways of the world. We're also thinking about, even in terms of public spaces, how do we then interact, in events, in the media, in offices? Offices might now start going down. People might start to take up the working from home aspects. And to I think continue that direction. So I think the post-COVID world is going to be very different. But one of the questions I do ask myself is it going to affect Africa as much as it's going to affect the world? And are we going to be left behind even more? And I ask this because Kenya or African countries have not been as affected as some of the European and American states, right? And so they're going to take a lot more changes in the world. But because we've not been as much affected, we're not going to be able to institute large measures as other countries are. So that may leave us some steps behind in terms of the trajectory of the world. But if we're wise, I think we're going to make some changes. Some industries are already pivoting. The textile industry has taken an upsurge now. We've started to talk a lot more about local production because of things that like the border closures. Agriculture, some farmers have been unfortunate to throw away some of their produce here in Kenya, but because of the border closures, now there's an opportunity for them to sell. So in some cases, there will be some losers and there will be some winners. And I think if Kenya tries to take advantage and invest in some of the winning industries, I think we'll be in a good position.
All right. Thanks for making time for us, Wangari Mukia, an economist and CEO, Expertise Global Consulting, talking to us about the issue of how to recover from this pandemic and what the economic outlook looks like. We'll be speaking